Welcome, everyone. Today we have with us General Robert Spalding on a special edition covering 100 days of Joe Biden. We've had Michael Chertoff, Robert Zulik, and a number of other politicians on our platform discussing Joe Biden's first 100 days. And today we have with us once again General Robert Spalding. Robert, how have you been since we've last spoken?
Been great. We're finally starting to come out of this coronavirus craziness, and life's getting back to normal.
Good to hear. We're sort of going through a similar stage ourselves. I suppose we can kick things off with a sort of general overview on Joe Biden's first 100 days and your sort of initial impressions.
Well, I mean, obviously, and from the media standpoint, it's been a lot quieter. Certainly, the media seems to like Biden a lot more. At least he's not President Trump, I guess, in their eyes. I think from a foreign policy standpoint, he's continued many of the Trump policies, particularly in regards to China. One of the big challenges that it seems that the Biden administration has is that they're, at least toying with the idea of bringing back the Iran agreement, which is extremely problematic, particularly because it doesn't really prevent the Iranians from getting a nuclear weapon. So that's a little bit disturbing. I think probably for me, the most really unexpected and shocking turn of events, and maybe they shouldn't be so, is the aggressiveness with which the People's Liberation Army, Navy, and other forces, Air Force, have been essentially, pursuing Taiwan. So you've had many incursions into Taiwanese airspace, and then a number of deployments of military forces. So it just seems like, the Chinese Communist Party is being much more aggressive territorially. Of course, you had also a lot of the issues with India that was happening, over the last year. So I think that's a real concern. And then, of course, you had the buildup near Ukraine of Russia. So overall, it doesn't seem to be a very good looking space. But and then domestically, I think Biden has been focused on infrastructure, which I do think is positive. The United States needs to build infrastructure, and then but then we've got this huge border issue, which now was somewhat under control, and now you have again another surge coming from the border. A southern border of the United States, and then you have another very large stimulus package, which I don't think bodes well for future inflation or the stability of the dollar. So I think it's a mixed bag.
I think there's a number of things you said there that we will definitely touch up on a bit later. I'm going to start with illegal immigration. It's been a bit of a talking point here. Seeing the surges that Joe Biden, his first few months, has had. So a few sort of statistics for our listeners who are unaware. So last year, January and February 2021, we saw around 36,000 illegal immigrants come into the States under President Trump. This year, January 2021, it was 78,000. February was over 100,000, and March just gone is 172,331, which is one of the highest America has seen in its recent years. Why do you think there's been such a rise in illegal immigration under the Biden administration?
Well, I think interestingly enough, if you look back in the kind of the Democratic Party's history, Cesar Chavez, which is, led a number of farm worker strikes in the West, was very much, pro-labor, and also very much anti-illegal immigration. In fact, he campaigned heavily. It's really interesting to note that both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have been promoting, this what I would consider suppression of wages through illegal immigration, and there's sort of made strange bedfellows. What happened really with the Trump presidency is kind of a reversal of the Republican administration, and it's much more pro, American worker, which means that it has to be anti-illegal immigration because that tends to suppress wages. So there's so many issues going on within the labor market right now. Right now, labor's tight, and the reason is that these stimulus packages, people are tending not to want to come to work. I was just in Texas, and they have a number of problems recruiting people for jobs in construction, in the restaurant industry, services industry. And the reason is because many of them can, make more money staying, receiving, unemployment. So this is a big challenge that we have today. So that's one problem. Then the other problem is you have, when they do come back eventually to work, you're going to have a lot of illegal immigrants that are going to be vying for those jobs, and then that's going to be suppressing wages, making it even harder. So I think there's a number of issues that the Biden administration, interestingly enough, just really doesn't have a policy to combat. They really don't even have a policy with regard to how they're going to deal with this, which is incredibly unfortunate, because I think it's going to harm a lot of people in the United States.
One of the interesting things I read recently regarding the United States and legal immigration, and I wanted your take on this, was on Joe Biden's rhetoric. So one of the things that they apparently, one of the big causes of illegal immigration, and one of the big impacts is actually the president's words and his rhetoric. So there was it's almost like a study that showed, because of Trump's, general rhetoric and his general, hostility towards illegal immigration, it actually made a difference in terms of there was less there's less chance, illegal immigrants want to come to the States. And I think Biden's rhetoric from January, when the numbers started to rise, and in February, has changed, and he has been a bit stronger towards illegal immigration. But it's interesting because we were looking here at Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth, and we couldn't really see a clear policy on illegal immigration as the numbers continue to surge up. Would you agree with that? Do you think his sort of rhetoric isn't helping?
Oh yeah, and I think it's part of a component of American politics, that the bully pulpit of the presidency can be used to sway, and influence. And in fact, that's, I think, what the President Trump did quite well with regard to illegal immigration. As you note, I think, for the most part, rather than having a real policy with regard to immigration, I think what the Biden administration appears to be trying to do is make everybody happy and satisfy all sides. And I think when you do that, you end up having this wishy-washy, thing that you're detecting as a lack of a policy. And I would agree with that. I don't think anybody knows what the policy is. And with Biden basically, encouraging this immigration through his rhetoric, I think he's just making what was already a bad problem worse. And I think the more forceful, if he was going to be more forceful and kind of using that bully pulpit to slow that down, I think it would be very helpful, given the fact he doesn't have a policy.
I think another sort of big talking point is Afghanistan. Joe Biden's made the news recently in terms of withdrawing all troops from Afghanistan. I know Trump had installed a similar policy. I believe Biden's pushed that further forward in terms of withdrawing all troops from Afghanistan. What are your views on that? Because we've had quite contradictory thoughts on the removal of American soldiers in Afghanistan, some hailing it as a successful move and a good move, others saying that The second US soldiers are out of Afghanistan, women's rights may deteriorate all over again, and all the progress that's been made over the last 15 years will almost go to kaput, and there's already instability with the Taliban and Al Qaeda. What are your sort of thoughts and opinion on his what he's doing in terms of Afghanistan?
Well, what I've tried to say, and what, the national security strategy, that came out during the Trump administration, which again, the Biden administration has, for the most part, adopted, is that, actually the American economy is what really upholds its ability to have national security. And the things that we haven't been investing in over the last 30 years, infrastructure, manufacturing, science and technology, STEM education, are now we're starting to see that those chickens are coming home to roost in terms of it's creating this not only a social issue in the United States, but also a supply chain issue with regard to our military forces. But more importantly, and this is particular to Afghanistan, the U.S. still continues to spend, $700 to $800 billion per year on defense. Well, when you spend that much on defense and you're neglecting infrastructure, manufacturing, science, and technology, then essentially you're doing what the Soviets did in the latter stages of the Cold War, and really bankrupting the country. And not investing in economic productivity. And Afghanistan is no more, is probably the best example of how that works. So when I was in the White House, we looked at what you could do with the money that was being spent in Afghanistan every single year. And we said, you could put 200,000 American kids through 4-year STEM degree programs every single year. In 5 years, you've trained 1 million new scientists and engineers. And so it's really the opportunity cost of the capital that you put into Afghanistan that's not being really thoughtfully compared and contrasted against what we gain out of being in Afghanistan. So I think there's been just this belief on the part of Washington, D.C. pundits that we need to be in Afghanistan because we can't have, it's bad for America if we don't succeed. But nobody's defined what success is. And so in the absence of having a definition of success, it's much better to declare success and then come home and take that $40 to $60 billion a year and invest it in our own people. And I think that's what President Trump was trying to get to. I was afraid that President Biden was basically going to walk away from that. I was very happy to see that he stuck with it. And I think if we're true to what America is, we're going to stop, having a lot of these, overseas affairs where we spend trillions of dollars and really begin to focus that money on the country. And when we do that, when Americans become productive and prosperous, then it reinforces in our allies and partners the importance of the democratic political system and the free trade system. And what's happened is, because we've neglected that to the detriment of our own citizens, even our allies and partners, and even some of our own citizens are beginning to question the viability of democracy in the 21st century. And that's just absolutely ridiculous. And it's more because the Chinese Communist Party has done a better job of saying no, an authoritarian model where you essentially take from your partner, you take from the globalized world in order to ensure full employment, so that your citizens don't revolt because you're essentially a dictatorial tyrant. I think that has somehow, now garnered favor amongst emerging market economies and even some, developed economies. And that is just, it's really not understanding the dynamics that are going on. And most importantly, it's a failure of the United States to lead by showing how successful a true democracy, a democratic republic with free trade can provide prosperity and freedom for its citizens. It's really that ability to inspire the world. in our model is what we've walked away from. And that's the most powerful thing. And the most powerful weapon in America's chest. And it's a weapon, quite frankly, that the Chinese Communist Party, Putin, the North Koreans, Iran, nobody can match. If you're creating an environment where American citizens can meet their true potential, that is what is so endearing to the rest of the world. Not, can you go and, fight terrorists abroad? That's great for a movie, but it's not necessarily great for a world leader.
I think mentioning China is probably a good point to discuss Biden and China. It's clear, I think, he's probably been a lot stricter than a lot of people thought he would be towards China, a bit more hostile than I think many pundits and many other politicians had expected. How would you rate so far his response to China and his general foreign policy so far towards them?
Well, I think part of the thing is they've frozen a lot of the policies in place or suspended them because there was supposed to be some widespread review of policies. I think that review is still underway, and so we don't really have a clear message from the Biden administration as to what their China policy is. That being said, they had a horrible first meeting in Alaska that really, enabled the Chinese Communist Party to have a platform to deliver its propaganda. And it was clear that we weren't prepared for that. And so, I'm going to have to basically say I can't answer because I don't know what the policy is. To the extent that I think that they retain a lot of the policies, I think it's good. There's not really an indication, either way, which way they're going to go, other than the fact that Blinken has said, he has reaffirmed genocide with regard to the Uyghurs. They have talked about Hong Kong. They've talked about Taiwan. There's a recognition about these things, but still, we don't have a clear idea of what, who Biden as a president really is when it comes to a China policy.
Taiwan's a great talking point here. I've read so many different things from U.S. politicians regarding China, Taiwan, and the United States of America. Some are saying a conflict between the two countries isn't necessarily a bad thing. It distracts China slightly. Others have said the US need to be more involved. There's really there doesn't seem to be a unified approach so far on Taiwan. What do you think the Biden administration should do when it comes to Taiwan and China and the ongoing conflict?
Well, I think there's not a whole lot we can do. I think part of the problem is we've waited too long. If you look at the weaponry, particularly the conventional weapons, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, rockets, all of the capability that the Chinese Communist Party has built up on its side of the strait, that's really overwhelming firepower. Now, there is, we saw that happening, and we basically didn't do anything about it. Now we're faced with the prospect of, I really believe the Chinese have the power they need to take the island. And so what are we going to do about that? What we're not going to do, I feel very confident about, is that we're not going to go to war with China over Taiwan. And the reason is because China's got nuclear weapons and the US has nuclear weapons. And so while we did have this, this dance between the Soviet Union and the United States around, conflict zones, we never had direct conflict between those two opponents, and it's because the presence of nuclear weapons on both sides. So that's the issue that we have with regard to China. We're not gonna go to war with China. And so what then does that, what are the response options that may be expected from a war over Taiwan? Well, it could be, it could look like resupply in terms of Berlin. It could look like mass evacuation, like in, some of the, the darkest days of the Korean War, where we had to, really rush in naval vessels to pull, troops out of combat, but we also pulled a lot of Koreans out of harm's way there. So I think, probably resupply, evacuation is going to be, where the United States is called upon in this conflict. But, ultimately, China decides to move on Taiwan. There's not a whole lot that the United States can do. It's kind of like if the U.S. wanted to move on Cuba, what were the Soviets going to be able to do? It's so far away, and it's in America's backyard. That's the same thing here. It's so far away, and it's in China's backyard. I think the bigger question is, what are the repercussions for China when they do that? And I think they know what those repercussions are. I think it's going to be isolation, financial, economic, trade, political, social isolation. Just like we had when in the beginning of the Cold War, when that is what the United States led, that coalition of democracies, to isolate the Soviet Union and to ensure that they couldn't use the fruit of democracy, which is innovation and technology and talent and capital, to build up its tyranny. And so I think that's what you're going to see coming out of this. So in a lot of ways, it's a terrible story, but it could also be a good story in that it hastens the decline of the Chinese Communist Party. And so you might say, well, why would Xi Jinping do this? Why would he threaten this steady supply of innovation, technology, talent, and capital from the West by invading Taiwan? And the answer is because for Taiwan, it is a key issue for the Chinese Communist Party. It's a key political issue, and Xi Jinping believes that it's his role in the lore and history of the Chinese Communist Party to be the guy that brought back Taiwan, the renegade province. And I think it's unfortunate for the Chinese Communist Party, because I think it's going to be disastrous. And if you talk to some in the party that tried to speak up, I think they would tell you the same thing. But Xi has basically wrestled the party to the ground, and it's his to control, just like it was under when Mao Zedong was at the height of his power.
Do you think Taiwan, in some ways, is a welcome conflict for the United States of America? Maybe not just America, maybe the UK too, just general Western democracies, because there is this really big argument that I've seen from some US commentators that this is a conflict that I think, like you rightly said, that probably logically China don't need to involve themselves in. Do you think this could in some ways be beneficial to the United States of America?
Well, it is insofar as, it means the eventual isolation of the Chinese Communist Party from the free world. But, I don't say it's welcome, because, I love the people of Taiwan, and it's going to be absolutely devastating for the people of Taiwan. Just like what's happened in Hong Kong has been devastating for the people of Hong Kong. It's not a good thing. But maybe it will, in some ways, it's a necessary thing. I think what we have, and you really saw it during, 2020, is the Chinese Communist Party is so infiltrated both domestic and international institutions. In the case of 2020, medical institutions and medical policy making. And we've seen the outcome. It's been absolutely disastrous for the global economy, for, civil liberties, for human rights around the world, and I think in that sense it's going to be good, because it really reveals once, and again, I think this is probably within the next 5 years. Both of the outgoing commander of the Indo-PACOM and the incoming commander of Indo-PACOM said 6 years. I think it's 5 years. I think it's probably after the Olympics sometime. And because the Chinese Communist Party is going to want that to go off without a hitch, But I think after that, then the clock is ticking to what their timeline is for doing this. And so, I think in that sense, it's terrible, but it will at least, get democracies to begin to understand the threat that China poses to the free world.
How important in general is Southeast Asia when it comes to U.S. China relations? There's a really big argument that a lot of how important, Southeast Asia is going to play in this battle. That there's arguments that the United States of America could start to make trade and make general influence over those countries a bit easier, to almost take them away from their sort of China reliance. Do you think that's potentially a good move, and US should play a more of a maybe an active role in Southeast Asia? And B, do you think that's something Joe Biden will be doing?
Well, I mean, I think the other thing that's going to come out of this, the Taiwan conflict is this ability for the United States to basically say very clearly to allies and partners in the region that I know you've been saying that you don't want us to make you choose, but we're going to make you choose. And you have to choose, to go on our side if you want us to continue to be a security partner as well as an economic partner. Now, if you decide not to go that way, then we can no longer be a security partner. I think the United States has been very hesitant to do that. It was a little bit more forceful under the Trump administration. I think the Biden administration has backed off some of that.
Do you think, sorry to cut in, do you think those countries would choose America?
Well, I mean, when you, it's funny because you would say, well, they wouldn't, but when you pose a question this way, and I've done this a number of times, I've said, okay, they say, well, don't force us to choose. And I say, well, do you want the PLA Navy to protect you? Absolutely not. So I think there is, when faced with the choice, there is, I mean, it really comes down to, do you trust the Chinese Communist Party? And I can guarantee you to a person, leaders in Southeast Asia, throughout Asia, none of them trust the Chinese Communist Party. None of them, not a single one of them. And so, and that's why we're a preferred security partner in Asia. But ultimately, as I said, national security and national power come out of economic power as a basic fundamental foundation for it. And what we've allowed is the undermining of our economic competitiveness to such an extent that we're even the supply chain with which we would supply a military force to provide security in the Asia region is reliant on China, because it is a base of the global supply chain. And they've done that deliberately. It's been a strategic move. It wasn't free trade economics that caused the world to make China its workshop. It was deliberate policies by the Chinese Communist Party to tilt the balance in their favor. And one of the most important ones is the fact that they've got a closed financial system, a non-convertible currency, strict capital controls, and yet they are a part of the IMF, the World Bank, SWIFT. They are basically connected to the global financial system, but the balance of payments that is supposed to work as a mechanism for equalizing trade imbalances is not allowed to work when the People's Bank of China controls the exchange rate for the renminbi, which is what they do, and which is why the Chinese Communist Party has created this really financial system that's impervious to attack. You can't have a run on the banks in China because your debt is 300 times GDP. If the People's Bank of China won't let you convert, you're stuck. And every U.S. corporation, every multinational corporation, every bank that has money in China, it can't get it out, and they don't honestly report that to the market. And so what's going to happen is many of these banks and corporations are going to take a huge haircut. Their stocks are going to take a huge hit. And what I say is, what these CEOs are thinking is, God, just don't let me be the first. Let somebody else be the first, and let them be the fall guy, because everybody is going to be absolutely slammed. I talked to a very big telecommunications firm this week, and they're really going about the hard work of separating what's in China, making sure that's China, and what's out of China is not China, because they understand what's coming. It's coming. There's this bifurcation. We are moving, as this Cold War solidifies and deepens. We're moving towards a bipolar world, and that's going to make a big impact with regard to the global economy.
I think something that you raised really well in your book, Stealth War, you actually mentioned Joe Biden and Hunter Biden within the book. And for our listeners who haven't read the book, Stealth War is a great read, and I thoroughly recommend it. But you mentioned Joe Biden in the book, and I think that there's generally been a sort of, if you like, a thing that we see in the UK where people are almost prepared to give China a slap on the wrist, but not take real concrete action as in case that it has a financial impact on their countries. Do you see Joe Biden going further than just a slap on the wrist to the CCP and China, and taking some of this, some of the action, this decisive action that you've talked about that could help combating China? Do you see him being that person who will take, if you like, authoritative action towards them?
I don't think so. I don't think, and I doubt that it's just President Biden. It's probably his advisors will say that, we need to work and cooperate with the Chinese Communist parties in areas where we have mutual interests. Of course, Chinese Communist Party shares no mutual interests with a democratic United States. It sees it as, really fundamentally a threat. So, and if you listen to what he said during this town hall, where, genocide of the Uyghurs is really a Chinese cultural thing, it really displays a lack of understanding of the nature of Chinese propaganda, Chinese Communist Party propaganda, and how it is designed to basically control the narrative about China, right? So it's because of China's culture that they're committing genocide on the Uyghurs, not because of the Chinese Communist Party. And so, just in terms of his understanding of China, based on that conversation, I would say that he has learned well from the China scholars in Washington, D.C., who, for the most part, if they're a China scholar and want to continue to go to China, end up carrying the Chinese Communist Party's water and say a lot of the same things that Joe Biden said in that town hall. So, I think that the only thing that's going to cause President Biden to be aggressive to China could be an attack on Taiwan, where he's really has no choice politically other than to basically be hardline. So otherwise, I think he's going to try to be as accommodating as he can without triggering not just the Republican Party, but those in the Democratic Party that see the Chinese Communist Party as an existential threat, not to the United States, but to democracy writ large. I mean, that's the real challenge. Their goal is basically to undermine democratic systems worldwide and promote a system that favors authoritarian systems where you have single party rule.
I think when we in the UK heard about the Biden genocide and part of their culture comments, I think we presumed it was like a joke or like a meme kind of thing. I don't think any of us actually took it serious until we actually saw it. You've touched on moving to domestic issues. You've touched on the sort of Democratic Party. I think one of the real fears in the UK coming towards the election last year in America was the state of the Democratic Party. it's been cited that the Democratic Party in the US is almost like the Conservative Party, Lib Dems, and Labour in the UK, all condensed into one party. When you listen to some of the politicians, part of the Democratic Party, that they seem very divided, and it seems like a really a hugely mixed and a diverse group of people. When I say diverse, I mean in the sense of no sort of unified economic approach. There's no real like cohesion there. Is that a concern? Because I'm seeing with the infrastructure bill and other various bills that he's put forward, there has been some resistance even from members of his own party. And is that a bit of a concern? And what do you see, being in America and having worked in the White House, the general state of the Democratic Party?
Well, I think both parties. It's not just the Democratic Party. I mean, you look at what's going on with Liz Cheney in the House. The Republican Party has its own demons, and really, I look at both parties and I say, okay, the problems that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have in terms of, which way they're going to turn really revolve around, are you loyal to the party or are you loyal to the citizens you serve? I think what we have in both parties is this contingent of people that, are more loyal to the party than they are to the American people. And I think in today in the Democratic Party in the United States, I think the people that are more loyal to the party are in charge of the party. I think in the Republican Party, what's happened is because of President Trump and his overwhelming popularity amongst the electorate and the Republican side, that those that want to serve the citizens have really snatched control of the party, and those that are loyal to the party really want to snatch control back. And so you see there on both sides, there's a fight going on between those that are loyal to the party and loyal to citizens that they serve in their districts and their states. And the people that are loyal to the party are in control, and the people that are loyal to the people are in control. And so that's where I see the political parties today. I think it's unfortunate for the Democratic Party because I think it's going to cause them to lose the House in 2022 because the Republicans are going to be seen as more responsive to voter needs, which is why, by the way, the Republican caucus is going to kick Liz Cheney out of leadership because they recognize that, come 2022, she's no longer going to be a congressman out of her state because somebody's going to go in and run against her because the people are just angry. They're mad. And rightfully so. If you elect a representative and you say, this is what we expect of you, representative, and they go and they basically vote a completely different set of issues and topics and priorities that don't align with what you see as in your own interest, then we have, and this, by the way, this is why the Chinese Communist Party has been so effective in the United States, because we've created this duopoly in America where the parties represent the parties and they don't represent citizens. And so that when you don't represent citizens and you have people essentially feeling like the government is no longer working for them, then you create this really, really bad kind of hyper partisan situation, which we have today. And it's not just hyper partisan between the parties; it's hyper partisan within the parties, because you're beginning to see all of this stuff fracture. And then the Chinese Communist Party comes in and says, "Hey, like in Alaska, what about BLM? And you guys are, slaughtering blacks and all of these things that Yang Jiechi said to Tony Blinken." They take advantage of it, and it's really, it's this game that authoritarians play. They basically say, well, don't look at us doing organ harvesting or genocide. Look at you. You've got riots in your street. Well, the riots in our street is because the people a lot of them have had it. Now there's others that just want to ride. That's a complete different story, but there is widespread discontent within the United States. And it's not because of the Constitution. It's not because of our system. It's because the people and the parties that are controlling it aren't doing the jobs that the people thought that they sent them to Washington, D.C. to do. So, it's commentary on America. But the thing about it is, I think we're starting already to see the changing of the guard we see it in the Republican Party. I think the same thing's going to happen after 2022, and the Democratic Party basically gets kicked out of the House.
Do you think that shift will be back more towards the center for the Democratic Party? It's so hard in the UK to judge the status of both parties. We're never big fans of putting people in categories right, left, center, but to simplify it, it's very hard when you follow the Democratic Party to really see what they're sort of pushing. You see big political figures such as Bernie Sanders and AOC and these kind of guys, and then you see a lot more moderates, if you like, center-right people as part of the party. Do you think Biden is going to take that shift maybe towards the center? Is that something that you envisage happening in the Democratic Party, or do you think it's going to move further and further towards the left?
Well, I think I do, and I think it's because of this fact. I think people in America, they want to be able to, live their life, have a good job, raise kids, own a home, be able to give their children a better life than they had. I mean, this has over 200 years been the American dream. And I think what we've seen is we've lost that. And people want to get it back. And so, and you get it back not by, burning your cities down. You get it back by having, you have law and order, you have economic opportunity. I think one of the huge things that we don't talk about at all is the consolidation of economic power in the United States, and how, we haven't had a functioning antitrust system for decades. And so I think Americans are starting to recognize that, it's time to bring back a little economic opportunity to the working class in America. And the weird thing is, it used to be the labor unions and the Democratic Party that represented that. But unfortunately, they just don't understand that people don't just want to check and to check out. They want to feel like that they are an owner of the society, and they want to give their kids a better life. And the way you do that is by having the ability to generate jobs and generate economic growth. Well, right now, that's not what we're doing. And the coronavirus, my gosh, it's the biggest poison pill for economic activity in the history of the world. And we are basically treating it as a means of socializing the American economy. But I think, America being kind of a country of immigrants, and and I'm talking about legal immigrants, there is this sense of independence that, that is kind of unique. And so the population just, I don't think for very long will stomach, sitting at home, getting checks. Although it isn't, as I mentioned, it is an issue in some cases where, we have a labor shortage. So I think we're on the precipice of real change that we've needed for the last couple of decades. And it's this whole system of, where people believe that, having a universal basic income is the way towards, happiness. I don't think it is. I think people want to feel like they own their own, like they've earned their ownership in their citizenship, and they own that they can look back and say, the time I put on this earth to, I see that legacy in my children, and I had an opportunity to kind of go and do and live the life that I wanted to live. that is where I think America is its best. And I think, right now we're not at its best, but I do see that as a big reason why the Trump administration came into power, why Bernie Sanders was so, popular within the Democratic Party. But I think ultimately, it's not Bernie Sanders. When you talk to young people in America, it's like, they're actually more conservative. And we were just having this conversation this week. The baby boomers maybe kind of mess the country up for the rest of us. And then the millennials are going to be the ones that basically put it back on track, because they're just tired of all the shenanigans. They want to put, again, give me a job. Let me, own a home. Let me make a better life for my kids. This is something that I think is important to people. And I think the millennials, and furthermore, America, is going to consistently, because of the system that it has, is going to consistently be a beacon for immigrants that are coming in. And what I've seen, throughout my life in living in America, is that they tend to be the most patriotic Americans that we have, and they tend to teach their children the value of the Constitution and the system that we have, the system that is egalitarian and really, depends on what you put into it in terms of what you get out of it. So I think there's a lot of promise. It doesn't look good right now, but I think you have to go through a little difficulty before people begin to see that, hey, some changes need to be made.
I think a lot of people on our platform will definitely agree with your comments there. I think it definitely resonates well generally with the Conservative Party and conservative sort of thinkers in the UK. And I think most people would agree, most immigrants, obviously UK and America, completely different countries, but I look at myself, for example, son of two immigrants, and I probably feel more British than people who have been in this country maybe 4 or 5 generations more than me. So I definitely do see that and agree with that. We have a sort of growing, if you like, issue where we're seeing sort of quite a left-wing movement, this sort of universal increasing, wanting universal credit and that kind of stuff. We're largely seeing that in cities like London. And every election result that we've seen probably in the last 10 years has actually shown that outside of London and outside of urban cities, most of the country, most even young people have these sort of conservative values in terms of they want to work, they want to contribute to the economy. Is that similar for America? And in the sense of New York, LA, is that the kind of urban hub in the sense of maybe those two cities have that kind of maybe more slightly left-leaning kind of people as opposed to the rest of the country, whereas the rest of the country maybe is a bit different outside? And secondly, I want to go with, do you think the Democratic Party is doing enough outside of creating policies arguably for those two states or those kind of states for the rest of the country?
Well, so yes, I do. And so I grew up in a rural area. My family, were in agriculture. I thought I was going to be a farmer. And I've lived in big cities, New York, Washington, D.C., Shanghai, Beijing. I think it's much easier to control people's actions within, large metropolitan areas. I think your freedoms are severely curtailed compared to what it is to grow up in a rural area. So I do think that tends to lead people to be more docile and willing to accept control. And I think when you get out in the rural areas where you don't have a lot of controls or a lot of oversight, because it's just not possible, that you tend to be a little bit more independent. And this has kind of been my last 3 years really focused on, in the United States, critical infrastructure, telecommunications, computing. If you look at our infrastructure in the United States, and I would venture to say it looks the same in just about every developed country in the world, it's built around supporting the metropolitan areas and not so much the rural areas. And so the productivity is actually in the urban areas and not in the rural areas. And so people in rural areas tend to leave for the urban areas in order to get jobs and create wealth. I think what needs to happen really to create more balance in developed societies is a willingness to extend that infrastructure into areas that typically haven't received it, and to enable technological migration and productivity to happen there in those rural areas. And I think when you do that, you can have some kind of migration back to some of these communities where they've lost a lot of their population. And I think that's healthy. I think the founding fathers in the United States, the reason we have the Electoral College is really the understanding that there's a different mentality and psychology of people that grow up in an urban area versus a rural area. And the rural areas don't want to be told what to do by the people that are living, in the cities. And that tends to be what is happening in America and why there's been such a backlash. And so I think one of the good things that could come out of this infrastructure bill is this reinvigoration. So in the United States, rural electrification really was difficult and really required government intervention to get electricity out into those areas. And I think it's going to require government intervention. What happens today is government sends money, and then instead of actually building out infrastructure, most of these companies pocket the money and deliver the same kind of poor service in terms of connectivity and computing in rural areas and they can't seem to get out of it, and the government just keeps throwing money at it. I think what they have to do is have policies that requires the build out of infrastructure, and then you're going to start to see a change in the balance of power between the rural areas and the urban areas. I think that's what's needed. I think it's a digital divide that we've been talking about. We haven't done anything about it. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission in the United States, has defined rural broadband as 25 down and 3 up. Anybody knows you can't even do the Zoom call on 25 down and 3 up. It's ridiculous to call it broadband. Furthermore, it's ridiculous for the country that invented the internet to be the worst connected country in the world in terms of service for price that you pay. And but that's the facts. I mean, you get much better service in Europe at a much better price. So I think there's a lot there, but it requires actually some deliberate action on the part of the government to get infrastructure in places that it doesn't typically end up.
I want to end with general sort of state of democracy and executive orders usage from Joe Biden. He has used more executive orders than the previous 10 presidents. There's a lot of different, thoughts on this, that some would be sympathetic in the sense of Congress needs reform. It's very hard to pass bills in 2021. Maybe it's harder than it was 20, 30 years ago. The flip side is the country is incredibly polarized, and he's not doing enough to try and build a bipartisan support amongst the two parties. Where do you stand on the heavy usage of executive orders from Joe Biden? And do you think it's a good thing that he's done, or do you think it's something that does concern you?
Well, look, I think the interesting thing about the Constitution is it gives the president powers, it gives Congress powers, it gives the judicial branch powers. To the extent that the judicial branch and Congress assert the powers that the Constitution gives them, then I think you're going to see things kind of even out. One of the things that happened during the coronavirus is that we had suspension of voting rules nationwide within the United States. And it was done by the executive branch of these states. A lot of the secretaries, state secretaries, issued orders to basically say, hey, we're going to have mail-in ballots. when the Constitution says the legislature shall do that. What's happening is all these legislatures are saying, you guys violated our, not only the Constitution, but our state constitution. So we're going to basically we're going to make sure that you can't do that anymore. So they're passing laws to prevent that. I think what's happening in the United States is the systems of checks and balances is beginning to be used. I think you'll see that, it's not going to be a runaway thing where the Biden administration is just able to continue to do this unchecked. I think what's going to happen is you'll probably get a new Congress in 2022. They have the power of the purse. The judicial branch can basically rule on the constitutionality of any executive order that Biden issues. Usually that has to do with either an overreach of power from one of the other two branches at the federal level, or it's an overreach of power from the states. And, the Constitution, gives certain authorities to the federal government, but it keeps everything else for the states, and everything not given to the states, it gives to the people. And so I think it's just a matter of these things are, I know, for example, there's numerous cases working their way through that have to do with things that were done with regard to the election that are going to be found to be illegal. Now, nobody wants to talk about that, but it is the case that that's the way our system works. It takes time to work. It's messy. And I think this is, what the Chinese tried to come into Alaska to say is, well, our system's better because it works faster. Well, yeah, it is if you're not a Uyghur or you're not from Hong Kong, or you're not, a Christian in China, then it doesn't work so good for you. But if you're on the side of the Chinese Communist Party and you stay on the side, well, then it works okay. Our system, in order to ensure that no one party or person or group or company can, attain unrestricted power, it has to go through this process of constant renewal and rebalancing. It has to rebalance. And I think Biden's just doing the thing that I think any president would try to do. You grab as much power as you can until somebody takes it away from you. By the way, the founding fathers knew that they would do that. That's why they created the system of checks and balances. And so it is a good system. It just takes time to work itself out.
That's great. Well, it's been great having you on, Robert. I suppose finally, we've been getting our guests to give an overall ranking of Joe Biden's first 100 days out of 10. I know it's so early and it's so difficult to give definitive numbers and stuff, but do you have an overall mark, a kind of mark you'd go with out of 10?
Yeah, I'd give him a C. It's got a C.
C, okay. I mean, it's so hard with
like a 75. It's 75.
75%.
If you grade on a curve, it could be a 65.
I mean, I suppose it is really interesting for us in the UK watching Joe Biden. One thing I think we would probably definitely agree with is definitely less noisy, and there seems to be a calmness in the United States of America. Whether that's actually a reality or not, I think you will probably know a lot better than us.
You know what I really appreciate now? I really appreciate good journalism. And I think that's the thing that's so missing. And unfortunately, this thing was CNN that started, really during the first Iraq war, and you started this 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news cycle. I think has destroyed journalism. And when you see people, and now you see people that aren't really traditionally journalists, but they're doing the work of journalists, either because they see a need. I think that's the part that we're missing. And the journalists really tend to be now, I think, are not associated with any major news organization. They're really just kind of independent operators going out there. It's like during the Gilded Age, we had what were called muckrakers, and they would just go out and dig up, dirt on, these big, robber barons. Right now we have the tech robber barons, but I think that's the thing that, it's really quiet now, because everybody, claps and applauds with Joe Biden, but there's no real thought going on, in any of those, any of those people.
I think that the CNN thing is really interesting. I was following your last election quite intensely. All of us at the organization were naturally weapons in America has a big impact on UK and the Commonwealth. And I remember for a good couple of months going on CNN and various other American news outlets. And I wanted to see, being a political person, what Trump's policies were. I'm quite focused on the policy side of things. That's what I generally enjoy, and I couldn't find a single thing. It was just all I saw was Ukraine, Russia, and I remember thinking, as a Brit who isn't a Democrat, isn't a Republican, doesn't really. There's lots of Democrats I like. There's lots of Republicans I like. I don't have any bias whatsoever. I just want to know what the sitting president of the United States of America, his policies are, and what his plan is for 2020. That's all I want to know. And I found myself having to watch his rallies to get an idea of what his policies were. And at that point, I remember thinking, as a Brit, if I can see the bias in the American journalism, I'm pretty sure most Americans, or a lot of Americans, can also see that. If I can see every time a journalist or somebody says, when they say President Trump, or they use sort of they give descriptions of this terrible policy, and they're using words that you just wouldn't associate with a journalist, and then even the questioning towards him. I remember thinking, this is just bizarre, and I think I constantly criticize our UK press for being quite left-leaning, and almost we have this thing as conservatives, we've been saying that they almost enforce their sort of social opinion on you as a media, and there's a real lack of people who think differently within media organizations at the moment. It's almost like you have to sign a document that this is a list of things that you must believe in. You must be this socially liberal, you must be this socially, and then you can be on the BBC and ITV and Sky and all these channels. It seems like that's what happens, whereas just finding people like, speaking to people like yourself, and generally people, just to get past that kind of general bias seems very difficult.
It's a psychosis. I definitely think it's a psychosis, and it's probably at least somewhat related to the technology that we've developed. So yeah.
Well, it's great to have you. Hopefully we'll be speaking to you again soon. To the rest of our listeners, this is part of our 100 Days of Joe Biden series. We've got a number of more politicians coming on our platform, and stay tuned, and hope you've enjoyed today.